it was a very busy time for me because I was taking care of Mother still, and I was also helping to take care of Reeves. Now, Elma did do her part with Reeves. However, because we had been so close, I wound up spending a lot more time with him. She would go take his meals to him, but that was it. But he wanted to visit sometimes and to play checkers and other things, and so we'd been close, and I'd take the time to do it. And
of course, school was now out of the question for him.
That's right, and it was very bad. For a time, I brought schoolwork home for him, but the teacher was afraid to get near him for fear she'd get the TB, and so pretty soon dwindled. There were no lessons and nothing for me to bring, and so he sometimes would listen as I did my homework and try to do something so he could keep learning. He didn't like the idea of falling behind, and after he had been out for 1 year, somebody died up at the hospital, and they had a place then that he could go.
But then he was separated from the family for a long time.
Oh, he was, and this was not easy for him. We wrote regularly, and I would go to see him as often as I could. And it was an interesting thing. The doctor had given us strict instructions how to care for him so we would not get it. And we had what they called a Hoover apron that we could put on over our clothes when we went in, and that had to hang on a special nail right by the door there where it was high enough nobody could get by it. And we'd put that Hoover apron on when we went in to take his food or whatever we did for him. And then when we came out, we'd hang that apron up and go wash our hands. And anything that he used had to be either burned or boiled. If you kept it, something you kept, it had to be boiled. And we very religiously followed Doc Reese's orders. And when Reeves finally did get into the hospital, he took us all in, gave us TB tests to see if anybody had picked up the germs, and he complimented us highly because nobody got it. And he felt like we'd followed instructions very well.
What year was it then that Reeves ended up in the hospital?
The year that I was a senior. Now, I maybe should mention how Reeves happened to get TB. Reeves, when he was in high school, had gone out for track, and he went for the distance races. And when he had been interested in that from the time we lived down the lane, when we lived down the lane, why, we used to run the distance between 2 telephone poles and then walk between the next 2 poles to kind of catch our breath, and then we would run another 2 poles. And we kind of got in the habit of doing that at that time. And so when he got in high school, his interest in the distance races just really continued, and the coach was glad to get him because he was the best man he had for the distance races. We didn't continue with our running the poles and so on. Of course, we'd moved from the lane by that time, and we didn't have the interest in track that he did because girls just didn't have track. But he became the best runner they had on the track team, and his sophomore year, the year he got sick, he had won in the track meet we had with the other schools, and it made him feel really good because he had practiced all that time, and it paid off. He was the winner. And the coach was very pleased, and he said, we're going to take not just, this was just between a few schools, and he was going to take him to the state the next year. He said, I think we stand a chance of taking the state. But that spring, as school closed, and he had been doing all this running, he went on a scout trip. And unbeknownst to any of us, the scoutmaster had TB. And Reeves and another boy slept in the tent with the scoutmaster. And Reeves and the other boy got the TB. And
did the scoutmaster know that he had it?
I don't know whether he knew it at that time, but he died shortly thereafter from it and may never have known what was wrong with him. But both Reeves and the other boy got the TB. And Reeves was a prime candidate because as school closed, he had pushed himself so much in the running that he caught a cold, and his cold got worse when he was on this trip. They slept on the ground, and he came home and he had pneumonia. And the pneumonia just evolved right into the TB. He was never up and well again after that.
What year was that?
Well, he was a sophomore, and I was a senior that year, so that was 1934. And he never got back to school, and he spent several years then.
That was earlier in 34.
When he got TB, honey, he was a sophomore, and that made me a senior.
What year did you graduate?
1934. But The year that Reeves died was the year that you were to be born. He died Christmas, Pearl Harbor Day, and you were born in the March after Pearl Harbor Day.
Okay.
So that's...
He did die on December 7th, or was that when the funeral
That was when the funeral was.
So it was a few days previous.
That's right. But that's how long he spent in the hospital.
So well, it was 7 years.
Yes, it was a long time. And all that while doing his best to get well. Now, at one time, he got well enough to leave the hospital. And this was after I had gotten out of high school, and I stayed home out of school for 2 years before I had a chance to go to college. And I have to say that to thank my parents a lot for that, because this one day I was taking care of Mother, and we were talking about different things, and the topic of school came up, and she said, you know, you've spent enough time here taking care of us. You've got to get off and go to school. And so when my dad came home, she said, we've taken advantage of Maurine long enough. She's got to get off to school, no matter. And my dad agreed. And so they said that fall I should go to college. But that summer, it was a strange thing. That was the summer I got pneumonia. And they were afraid I might follow in Reeves's footsteps. But I hadn't had the exposure that he had. And so I had the pneumonia, but I did not follow it with TB. But I did have it very hard. And they still didn't have any wonder drugs to treat it. They still bathed off your face and tried to keep the temperature down. But Doc Reese gave some kind of awful nasty medicine to me, a tablespoon at a time. And I learned later that he was giving me a tablespoon of whiskey. No wonder I hated it so bad. I remember pretending to be asleep when it was medicine time so I wouldn't have to take it. I hated it so bad. But I lost a great deal of weight during the time I had it. The fever burned off a great deal of weight. And when I got up, I had for years been trying to diet or something, you know, so I could be more slender. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, I said, but not like this. I looked sort of like a tall old skeleton. So much weight had fallen off that it looked terrible. So my dad began feeding me cream of wheat or the oatmeal or other things that we had. I had cereal about 3 times a day because he was sure that would put the weight on me.